Good evening, Kanchana. Good evening, all the presenters and also the uh, audience from Sri Lanka. Good evening, and also good morning, audience from UK. And I am Chatura Lianarachi, Assistant Director from Disaster Management Center. And I'm delighted to have Kanchana Ginige with me as co-chair. Over to you, Kanchana.
Okay, thank you very much. So this session is on disaster preparedness today. So we have 6 presenters and the session duration is 1 hour and 30 minutes. And from each presenter, we've got a 10-minute pre-recorded presentation that leaves us with about 30 minutes for question and answers. So we'll see how the time goes, and we'll have to probably manage. We'll have to cut short the question and answer session if you don't have enough time. But roughly, it's about 5 minutes at the end of each presentation for questions and answers. And may I just remind you very kindly that to put your phones on mute, silent mode, so there are no disturbances. And if you are not presenting or if you're not talking, also to mute your microphones to keep the noises and disturbances to a minimum level. Okay. So I think we can make a start with the first presentation. So Chamath, if you can run the first pre-recorded presentation. So this is from Edwin S. From Philippines. The title of the presentation is Making EWS Inclusive, the Philippine Experience on PWDS in Disasters, a Literature Review. Okay.
What is the Philippine experience on making early warning systems inclusive to the needs of persons with disabilities? My presentation will revolve around shedding light to this question. According to the risk report of 2018, the Philippines ranked third among all of the countries worldwide with highest risks, with at least 60% of the country's total land area being exposed to multiple hazards. 74% of the population is susceptible to their impact. To keep the public informed of possible storm surges, floods, or landslides, the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST of the Philippines, has developed an early warning system that warns residents in densely populated areas up to 48 hours in advance. Advisories are shared to the Office of Civil Defense, local government units, and the media. Early warning systems are further enhanced by the Free Mobile Disaster Alert Act of 2014, which mandates telecommunication operators to issue free public warnings via mobile phones. Article 11 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or UNCRPD, states the right to protection and safety of persons with disabilities in events of a disaster. In many cases, their living conditions and poverty exacerbates their vulnerability to disasters. Disability is closely linked to poverty, as one may cause the other. With more than 1 billion people living some form of disability, it is estimated that persons with disabilities account for 15% of the world's total population. They are overwhelmingly affected by disasters. Despite this, early warning systems for disasters are often not adapted to their needs. Under Republic Act 10121, or the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, persons with disabilities are classified as vulnerable and marginalized groups. It is recognized that they face higher exposure to disaster risk and poverty. However, without accurate data as to who or where they are, reaching them could be difficult. Visibility through data is an important consideration in ensuring the safety and protection of persons with disabilities during disaster situations. The country's data collection systems have yet to reflect accurate accounts of persons with disabilities. They need to be included when deciding early warning systems to ensure that the methods used are relevant to the needs of persons with disabilities. Handicap International cites 3 general principles in making early warning systems inclusive. First, all people can be reached by early warning system if they include many forms of communication. Second, early warning system needs to strengthen informal linkages and build upon people's capacities to respond. And third, early warning system is easy, cost-effective, and can be done within the community. Audio signals such as bells, alarms, sirens, radio, drums, and loudspeaker announcements are recommended for those with physical or visual impairments. On the other hand, visual signs in big font and flashy colors used in leaflets, posters, pictures, and flags are suggested for those with hearing or speech impairment. Auditory and visual signals, as well as gestures and body language, are for those with intellectual or mental impairment. It must be stressed that disability-inclusive early warning systems need to be developed in the preparedness phase, with support of persons with disabilities or actors working with them, and should be field tested. Local consultations in the Philippines yielded similar insights. It is recommended to develop simple and visual warning signals such as red, yellow, and green flags, to implement lighting systems or simple weather advisory, and to have deaf interpreters sign the updated weather forecast in televisions. Early warning signals must be sent to the targeted people, including the most vulnerable, such as persons with disabilities, so that no one is left behind. It is argued that very little has been done to develop disability-inclusive early warnings in the Asia-Pacific region. In the Philippines, there is limited literature on early warning systems being adapted to the needs of persons with disabilities. With what is available, several local studies point out the challenges in current situation. For example, in Marikina City, it's found that in National Capital Region, villages are taking steps toward inclusion. However, they still lag behind the ideals set by international guidelines. For the most part, inclusion is limited to prioritizing in rescue operations. Among those lacking are accessible early warning devices. It was also found out that early warnings are typically limited to audio signals. In another study conducted in Albay province in the Philippines, it was found out that there are early warning devices considered as disability inclusive, which is of course suitable for people with hearing or visual impairments. In terms of implementation, however, it was observed that if flags are in place, they are not always used. It is further reported that only a handful had established an office to address concerns of people with disabilities, even if it is provided under the law or Republic Act 10070. Moreover, it is observed that early warning devices in local government units are not sensitive to the needs of persons with disabilities. In most cases, only sirens are used, but it does not effectively reach those with hearing impairments. Given the limitations and challenges faced by the government in implementing inclusive early warning systems, it recognizes the pivotal role of non-government organizations, the private sector, and the media. A multi-stakeholder approach is used in disaster risk reduction activities, including early warning systems and emergency broadcast systems. It is evident that the Philippines still has a long way to go in ensuring that early warning systems are inclusive. Nevertheless, there are also good examples at the local level. In 2017, the Foundation for Disabled Persons Incorporated, or FDI, embarked on disaster preparedness activities. The organization believes that persons with disabilities should always be safe from disasters and must be involved in any preparations for disasters. Another example is the pilot of the Scale Up, Build Up project, or SUBU, in Guruyan, which is a village situated near an active volcano in the Philippines. The early warning system of the village works both with sound and visual signs. Villagers are assigned to warn persons with disabilities in case they do not see the flags. Community drills are also conducted to support the early warning system. In another case, the Dumaguete Efata Association of the Deaf is implementing a program to increase access to hearing-oriented disaster risk reduction and management efforts. It recognizes that sound-based signals, such as sirens or alarms, generally fail to alert persons who are deaf to the dangers of ongoing disasters. To address this, the organization DEF is working to produce a Filipino Sign Language lexicon for climate disasters and other related signs for inclusion in visual early warning materials. A final case to highlight steps in making early warning systems inclusive is the project implemented by the Center for Disaster Preparedness, or CDP. It was pilot tested in several municipalities in Eastern Samar. This is to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. Early warning systems in the pilot municipalities were reconfigured to be inclusive to the needs of persons with disabilities, especially those with visual and hearing issues. They utilized flags, which may be seen by persons with hearing issues. This was complemented by the use of local sirens that we call locally as batingao. These were used and were heard by persons with visual issues. A buddy system was also used when sending out alerts. On top of participating in planning and designing early warning systems, persons with disabilities were also able to partake in simulation exercises to test out the suitability of the early warning systems. Here are my final thoughts. The Philippines still has much to do in ensuring that its early warning systems are inclusive, but it may build on the good practices and lessons learned in pilot projects and in model local government units. Multiple communication methods must be utilized to address the range of specific needs of persons with different types of disabilities. Moreover, training on inclusive early warning systems must also be provided to their family and community members. I am Edwin Salonga from the Philippines, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Edwin, for that very important presentation. So our audience, if you have any questions for Edwin, you can send them through the chat box. So I encourage you to please send them through the chat box. I think we have a couple of minutes we can spend on any questions, and then Edwin maybe can answer them and or clarify or explain anything that you want him to. Please send, if you have any questions, through the chat box, please. It looks like we don't have any questions to Edwin. Edwin, can I maybe ask a quick question from you just to clarify things? So you kind of, in this literature review, have you compared the global context, like the context or the situation with inclusivity in different countries? Or is it just the Philippines you looked at in the literature review? Edwin, are you still there with us?
Okay, hi. I'm still here. So the literature review that I actually surveyed was only based in the Philippines. And in doing so, what I noticed is that there are a lot of scattered cases, good practices. However, these are not integrated into the overall system of our DRRM, or disaster risk reduction and management. So while the laws are there at the national level, but in terms of programs and projects that should be cascaded down at the local government units, these are not yet implemented. So I think there's still a long way to go in terms of making sure that our EWS are inclusive to the needs of persons with disabilities.
Okay, based on your reviews so far, so what are the countries, who are the countries who are doing very well actually, or comparatively better in terms of inclusivity in preparedness or early warning?
Well, my literature review is really just focused in the Philippines, and it does not compare in other countries. But there are also other projects in South Asia that are into making their systems more inclusive. However, I think the same case in the Philippines, these are more pilot projects rather than integrated into the overall system of the country.
Okay, thank you. We have another question which has come through the chat. So Hiran asks, how you address the movement of disables?
Well, in many cases, what happens is there is protocol at the local government unit that whenever there is evacuation and camp management, vulnerable groups should be addressed first. And this would entail women, children and youth, elderly, and persons with disability. What I noticed as well in my literature review is that in many cases, it's difficult to get the numbers of persons with disabilities because of their invisibility. The local government units do not have accurate data as to where they are and who they are, what their disabilities are. So while in terms of the law, they should be prioritized, but in actual implementation, it is still very challenging to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think with that question, we will have to move to the next one, next presentation because of the time. So if you have any questions, any other questions or follow-up questions, I think Edwin's contact details, the email is on the book of abstract. So you can certainly contact him via email if you have any further questions or follow-up questions. Thanks. Shall we, so now so the next presentation is on disasters, climate change, and development nexus on food security sector in Asia. So will be presented by Kumar, MASJ. Yes, we can, I think, play that recording now.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining my presentation on disasters, climate change, and development nexus, specifically looking at food security sector in Asia. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Amaratunga and Professor Hegg, who are co-authors of the paper. This paper is based on a regional study conducted by looking at various literature, report, and previous studies on climate change, disasters, and development in Asia region. I have organized my presentation based on this framework. We have looked at issues, we have looked at impacts, we have looked at solutions for climate change, disaster risk, and development challenges. When it comes to issues, the paper discusses complex interactions between climate change, hydromet hazards, and development. When it comes to impacts, the paper discusses chronic and acute impact of climate change, damage and losses from disaster events, and impact on the development, such as on poverty, unplanned development, and food insecurity. On the solutions paradigm, the paper discusses the need for an integrated approach for disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development, supporting the implementation of global frameworks such as the Paris Agreement for Climate Change, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and Sustainable Development Goal, or commonly known as SDGs. By looking at disaster data for the past 5 decades, disaster fatalities in Asia are primarily due to earthquakes, storms, followed by floods. This shows high degree of vulnerability and exposure of the region to various disaster events. Annual average losses from disasters in Asia and the Pacific region is around $675 billion. Some of the climate-induced disasters, such as floods and tropical storms, have a significant share in this count. Average fatalities from disasters in Asia and the Pacific region seems to be having declining trends for past 5 decades, thanks to some of the disaster risk reduction and early warning program implemented across the countries. When we compare number of people affected by disasters for the past 5 decades, Asia has reported a substantial increase with an increasing trend and way ahead compared to the rest of the world. This is a very interesting slide. When we compare climate-induced and seismic disaster events, you can clearly see how climate-induced disasters are on the rise over the past 5 decades. Disasters and climate change do not have their impact in an isolation. It impacts on development as well. One of the key sectors which is impacted by disasters and climate change is the food security sector. Before we go further, let's discuss what you mean by food security. It can be defined as a condition where all people at all times have economic and physical access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preference for a healthy and active life. It is also alarming that the largest number of poor and food insecure people live in Asia compared to the rest of the world. Considering its complex nexus with other sectors, it is evident that food security cannot be achieved in a single policy or an action. It has multitude of connections with climate change, disasters, and development paradigms. That is why we need coherence. That is why we need coherence framework, bringing climate change, disaster risk reduction, and development into an integrated approach. Food security can be considered as common interest for all three pillars. The implementations of SFDRR, which is the global blueprint for DRR, the Paris Agreement, which is the blueprint for climate change adaptation, Sustainable Development Goal, which is the blueprint for sustainable development, can play a significant role in food security in Asia, specifically in low and middle income countries. Based on my research findings, food security can be considered as common entry point for implementing SFDRR, the Paris Agreement, and Sustainable Development Goal in an integrated manner. SDG Goal 1, no poverty. Goal 2, zero hunger. Goal 3, good health and well-being. Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities. Goal 12, responsible production and consumption. Goal 13, climate actions are directly connected and contributing to food security. Paris Agreement actions such as early warning system, emergency preparedness, intervention on slow onset event, comprehensive risk assessment and management, risk insurance and climate risk pooling, resilience of communities, livelihoods and ecosystems are necessary conditions for food security. On the other hand, food security cannot be achieved without investing on SFDRR Priority 1, understanding risk, Priority 2, risk governance, Priority 3, investing in DRR for resilience, and Priority 4, enhance preparedness for effective response and build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Therefore, while each of these blueprints have magnitude and intensity of hazard will continue to increase due to climate change. Therefore, their direct and indirect impact on food production, productivity, availability, and access will be a major challenge in the 21st century. Therefore, communities in the region need to adapt to the prevailing and future climate change scenarios. We can also conclude that climate change adaptation is a necessary instrument for ensuring food security in the region. Furthermore, it is evident that climate change and climate-induced disasters will derail economic growth, targets set in the SDGs, specifically in low and middle-income countries in Asia. It is alarming that extreme event and climate wonders can exceed the coping capacities of countries, which may lead to food insecurity. As discussed earlier, food security is a common concern for the development, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk management communities. Therefore, it can be considered as a common entry point for integrated and coherent actions supporting the implementation of SDGs, SFDRR, and the Paris Agreement. Nexus between climate change, disasters and development, and food security is a complex and interconnected phenomenon. If we are to face the challenges ahead of us, coherent actions are needed. We need to go beyond segregated approach of sectors with artificial boundaries at the global, regional, and perhaps even at the national level. It is evident that action at the local level are more coherent. It proves the fact that we need to think globally, but we need to act locally. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar, for that presentation, which actually addressed tried to address a very important issue, I guess. So we have a question from Edwin, actually. What can the international community do to support coherence of actions at local level? Would you be able to answer that? Yeah, thank you. Do you want me to read the question again? Or yeah, it's actually in the chat box. So Edwin asks, what can the international community do to support coherence of actions at local level? I think your mic is on mute.
Unmute your mic.
Mr.
Sisire, unmute your mic. Chamat, can you? Technical team, can
Yes.
you?
Yeah, thank you.
Now it's okay.
Sure, thank you. I hope you can hear me well. I tried to unmute, but it says was muted me, so I was not able to talk.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, good. Thank you so much, Edwin, for that. I think it's not only international community. Based on my research in the Asia Pacific regions, these artificial boundaries are at the international level, and as well as at the regional level, as well as at the country level. And obviously, international organizations are important players, and they need to play a crucial role. But at the end of the day, real actions happen at the local level. So I don't know up to what extent we would be successful in breaking these artificial boundaries at the international and regional level, knowing that how these politics, how these boundaries, how these diplomacy work. But when it comes to countries, at least at the subnational, and when we go to the local level, these boundaries are almost non-existent. So perhaps I would say that rather than focusing on the international, while we are advocating for the same, but more actions can be done at the country level. Let's say in Sri Lanka, for example, if the SDGs are promoted and supported by the Ministry of Planning and Investment, if the disaster management agendas and SFDRR is promoted by the Disaster Management Agency and Ministry of Disaster Management and Internal Security, if the Paris Agreement and climate change adaptation is promoted by Ministry of Environment and related agencies, perhaps bringing them together and having kind of integrated approaches, coherence, and framework and planning will help us to move forward at the subnational and local level. But at the international level, I believe we can discuss, we can advocate, we can highlight these factors. But the fact is that these instruments are governed, and these instruments are led by different international mechanisms, intergovernmental, international, and UN-related mechanisms. So personally, I have doubt that up to what level we would be successful at the international level. But I'm very sure that we should be able to move forward at the national and subnational level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Chatur, I think unless you have any comments or questions, we can move to the next presentation.
Of course, Kanchana.
Yeah. Okay, Chamat will play the next presentation. So our next presenter is Ravi. So Ravi is going to present on application of participatory and appreciative approach on develop comprehensive disaster risk assessment tool at local level, special reference to Jaffna district of Sri Lanka. Over to you. Over to Ravi's actually presentation, pre-recorded presentation.
Welcome to you all. I would like to present my presentation on application of participatory and appreciative approaches on develop comprehensive disaster risk assessment tools at local level, special reference to Jaffna district of Sri Lanka. The presentation going to present about the background, study area, process and approaches, output of result, value of the approaches, conclusion. The background of the study area exceeding 12 meters height above the sea level, and also potential to impact of the natural disaster. The Jaffna district is a peninsula and consists of 7 habited islands with a surrounding lagoon and Bay of Bengal associated of Yaru seasonal river. Also, this is one of the rice zone area in the country. The main source of water as underground water, and also the natural disasters like flood, drought. It is every year, at least 6 months of the year, the district is vulnerable to those natural disasters, and also highly potential to multi-hazard, including hydrometeorological and coastal. Jaffna district consists 15 divisional secretarial divisions, including 435 Gramaladar division, and also there are 17 local. The objective of the studies: identify systematic process to address multi-hazard, encourage participation and appreciation for continuous involvement of the disaster event and planning, identify risk assessment tool for reducing vulnerability and increasing capacity, to empower the working communities, designing and implementing comprehensive disaster risk assessment tools, provide guidelines for capacity building, and develop partnership on resource mobilizations and community. The data collection was conducted in the form of the workshop, focus group, and key informant interview. Particularly the focus group discussion, the people with a wider perspective, such as the community leaders, field practitioners, local authority officers, and members, technical agency with the religious leaders, etc. And also have conducted 200 consultative workshop at bottom to top level and 100 practical capacity building and pilot studies for getting this tool development. Finally, the participatory approaches and methods used for find the result of output. The result of output through the key participation of development of comprehensive disaster risk assessment tool, users, decision makers, beneficiaries, and vulnerable people. We can see that Venn diagram, what I saw, themselves they assess their risk, hazard, vulnerability, and capacity to cope, to prepare mitigation and manage the disaster at large. The activities for the application development: identify hazard, verification of hazard, capacity building, and field level endorsement, and pilot risk assessment at local level. Finally, produce the GIS-based map. The process, what I explained, we can see that some evidence to conventional and modern technology. The output of the result: participatory community map, GIS map, for deliver geospatial science and technological services, establish participatory learning environment for field level practitioners, trust building platform among the stakeholders management, develop data sharing mechanism at all levels. We can see some tools and document we used for this tool development: guidance of participatory community mapping and output participatory mapping, community mapping for the mobile coverage and early warning dissemination to last mile is already prepared by the community. The community map of the social and land physical vulnerability. those community map transform into GIS-based mapping for Gramaladar division. The consultative workshop on develop risk assessment matrix, develop draft risk assessment matrix, pilot assessment of matrix at G. Finally, the template developed and the practices and assessed through the field officers. Also, we develop participate learning tools and environment for this development of the comprehensive disaster risk assessment tools at develop unit and deliver geospatial science and technological services already established and provide the training and capacity building with the token of appreciation of our contributors and effective partnership to develop assessment tools at local level. The every step we appreciate for the participatory approach and for the contributors, they are more effective. The participatory approaches is very valuable for this tool development, participation, flexibility, optimal ignorance, teamwork, systematic, and ownership. These are the some value for our risk assessment. Finally, we can discuss about the risk findings. The research finding is revealed 14 types of hazard which are potential to occur disaster in the area. The outcome of the participatory and appreciative approaches were enhanced community involvement into actions. Participatory risk assessment metrics develop and apply to ensure the partnership of the disaster reduction at local level and all levels. The risk assessment tool facilitating for risk communication and decision making. The result of research could be applied and inspired to implement the priorities and target of Sendai framework action for disaster reduction at local level in future. Approach of tool could be contributed for achievement of number 17 sustainable goal in the local level. Thank you very much. Thank you for your listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi, for that informative presentation. So do we have any questions for Ravi? If you have any, please send through the chat box. We don't have any questions at the moment. So Ravi, I have just one question. It's not really a question, actually. I just would like to know a bit more about this appreciative approach that you followed. Could you please tell us a bit more about it, what this appreciative approach is about, and also why it was considered as an important approach to follow in this study?
Yes, this is one of the main, the pulse of the disaster risk reduction and disaster risk assessment, because the people who are facing the issues, people who are collaborating, people who are coordinating, people who are involving any activities, they must involve. The involvement of the what I call involvement of the people should be increased. That's mean the money is not a value to for this type of disaster reduction activities. Mind is the one of the main part. That is called as mind. Money is not a value. Money is not a tool to increase this type of activities. The mind is the one of the tool for develop this type of things. Therefore, last 5 years we have followed that one. We are not invest any more money to that, but all the outcome that's you can see that the develop the GIS lab is on the local level, the capacity building on the local level, and risk assessment matrix for on all 14 hazard. We have a risk assessment criteria and matrix for individual GN division. We can evaluate with the tools. So all the things without any money, only the participatory, not only the participatory, the people who invest their knowledge and skill and their commitment, we every step, A to Z step, we are appreciating to them by the, what you call, by the maybe decision makers by the maybe technical agency. After that, they increase their partnership to us. That is why we develop these type of things.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? So, any other questions? So I think we kind of come. Yeah.
Yeah, just to interrupt you, because we have
Yes.
30 participants here. So this is an announcement that if you have any question, you can use the chat box, and also end of the session, if we the time permits, we can have the question
A
that
discussion,
you can
yeah.
ask, you can directly ask the questions from the presenters. Of course, presenters are also allowed to ask any kind of a question through chat box at the moment. Thank you. Kanchana.
Thanks, Chatura. Yeah, I think we are kind of we are halfway through the session now. We have completed 3 presentations. Yeah, that's a question which has come through the a comment or question come through the chat box. It's good to have a bottom-up approaches being implemented in Jaffna. How the information generated being used by the district administration for DRR plans. Ravi, if you can comment on that one, please.
Yes, it's possible. It's possible because the step by step you can see that we have developed the tools, hazard mapping tools and other capacity building tools. Now we have developed that matrix. After the matrix applications, we can develop the zonation and for the 14 hazard, and we can overlay that all the 14 hazard. We can zonate the all high risk for the 14 hazard and ranking that things. After that, we can implement for the disaster mitigation measures. So every administrative and decision makers already involved this process up to matrix development. Then after we apply for the matrix development in the application part in the future, is it very valuable to that? That is why now the process ongoing.
Okay, so is the information being used at the moment, or will it be used in the future by the administration?
No, what I mentioned here, the whatever we collected information, hazard mapping and mapping, all over the stakeholders, they are utilized now at the moment for their development process and as well as the administration purpose. They have utilized. That's why our coordination has increased.
Okay, thanks, Ravi.
In
And
fact, I'm also, part of this
okay,
exercise with Ravi. So because of that, now of course we are using this data and information for planning, preparation, and also to mitigate the impact in Jaffna district itself.
that's good to know, actually, because yeah, especially sometimes there's research done, studies are done, detailed studies like Ravi's, and then the information probably is not used properly. So this is really good to know. And thanks, Tushar, for that question as well. So I think we are on time, but I think Chaturu, probably we didn't introduce ourselves to the participants and the presenters, because I was a bit conscious about the time at the beginning, so I didn't really introduce. But maybe quickly we can introduce ourselves as well to anyone who actually doesn't know us. So Chatura and myself, I'm Kanchana Ginige. We are actually co-chairing this session to ensure the session runs smoothly and on time and things like that. So I'm Kanchana Ginige, as I mentioned. I'm a senior lecturer in Northumbria University in the United Kingdom. So my main research area is in actually disaster management in the built environment. So that's why how I got involved in this symposium and chairing the session. So I did my PhD in University of Salford a few years back on a similar theme on relation to disaster management under Professor Dilanthi Amratunga's supervision. And then I joined Northumbria 5 years back as a lecturer. So that's just a quick introduction, about me. Over to you, Chatura.
Thank you, Kanchana. Of course, I am from the policy practice perspective. Of course, I am from Disaster Management Center and work for the Preparedness Planning Division. At the same time, I have 15 years of experience in disaster management field. Plus, I did my master's in disaster management at University of Peradeniya, and also I have good link with Professor Dilanthi also. So likewise, how I engage with this event by organizing this event, and at the same time, we had initially international symposium in 2014. After that, we thought of having another symposium this time. So the Huddersfield, Professor Dilanthi, and also quoted us, ADPC Sisira here. they have supported us. So that's how I involved with this one and co-chairing with you. I'm delighted to have with you as
Thank you.
co-chairs. Okay, shall we?
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
next
we'll move on to
presentation?
the fourth presentation. So our fourth presenter is Kalpan Hitchen. The paper or the abstract has been produced with the co-authorship of Madhu Sankar, NBS, and Jai Singh AB. So the presentation will be on network centrality assessment, assessing the transport network's resilience for urban flooding. Yes, we can, I think, start the presentation now.
Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to present you our research findings of assessing the transport network resilience for urban flooding, utilizing the network centrality assessment. These are the contents. Considering the flooding, which is the most disruptive form of natural hazard in both local and global context. According to the WHO, which is encountered that 47% of flood and storm-related events have affected 2.3 billion people in the world during the last decades. Therefore, many global agendas like Sendai Framework, like Sustainable Development Goals, have identified the mitigating the flooding impact and making cities resilient task in the today's world. In the urban context, flooding impact to the built environment, land, properties, and population, which is particularly known as the urban flooding. And their impact to the transportation system is considered as severe, and it caused to disrupt the flow of essential services and accessibility of the transportation system. Transportation network receives the immediate impact of flood because they became the preferential path for stormwater and fast inundation. Therefore, transportation system accessibility in high altitude. However, in the traditional transportation resilient assessment studies, which are only encounter the direct impact of the hazard, but system is interconnected system, and impact to the one road segment may impact to the entire transportation flow, which not been quantified in well manner in the recent studies. Moreover, there were limited studies have been carried out regarding the resilience of transportation network in real case studies with extreme flooding event scenarios. Therefore, in order to fill these gaps, the study proposed an alternative framework to assess the transport network resilience in a holistic and reliable manner with extreme flooding events. Considering the concept of resilience, it has multidisciplinary roles in many subject divisions. In the urban context, resilience can be defined as a property of urban system that enables it to survive and thrive in the face of uncertainty, adversity, and change. Thus, in order to enhance the resilience, it requires continuous efforts during all the phases of disaster management cycle. Resilience is a context-sensitive property of urban context, the defining characteristics of which may vary depending on various factors such as the spatio-temporal level of intervention, the risk in question, and the purpose of intervention. Therefore, Sharifi and Yamagata proposed 4 major questions to precisely focus and adjust the definitions of resilience depending on the specific research questions. They propose geographical scale, resilience for what, resilience to what, and resilience for what are the important questions that can use to define the resilience concept according to the given scenario. Based on that, in our study, we answer these questions as follows. In order to assess the transportation network resilience, our study follows the network centrality approach, which is originated in 19th century as a social scientific tool. But later on, the theory was developed with the graph theory and frequently applied to assess the transportation network accessibility, as it delivers the same cognitive result as both centrality and accessibility terms are often used to define the same concept. Therefore, in our study, we utilize closeness centrality and betweenness centrality to assess the transportation network resilience. So we utilize closeness centrality as it denotes the accessibility and attraction to origin destination trips, while the betweenness centrality we utilized as it denotes the attraction to the pass-by trips. These are the equations we are utilized to calculate the closeness and betweenness centrality. So in order to propose an alternative framework to assess the transportation network resilience, our study we follows 3 major objectives. We are examining the topological change of the transportation system, examine the critical change of the accessibility under the flooding condition, and examine the flood impact on the travel trips. So we select Colombo core area and select 3 catastrophic flooding events in order to assess our resilience study. So these are the data descriptions we are utilized in our study. And also when it comes to the methodology, we proposed completely open source approach as we utilized OpenStreetMap data for our road network, Center for Urban Data in order to acquire the flood data, and also conference database we utilized to acquire the distances for trip purposes and modes. So this is the calculation flow of centrality. So when it comes to the objective 1, there we examine the topological change of the transportation system. In order to calculate the topological change of the transportation network, it calculates the road centrality change due to the temporal flood inundation in the selected study area. There we estimate the threshold distance 1 kilometer for pedestrian movements and 10 kilometers for vehicular movements, as both movements patterns are denotes different transportation behavior patterns. Afterwards, the topological changes of the transportation network were identified as the increase or decrease in the centrality of the segment due to the flood. So in the pedestrian movement, you can see the direct impact is occurred in 3 to 7% of road segments, but their relative impact is considerably higher, which is accounted more than 40%. This clearly depicts the importance of holistic approach in the transportation resilience assessment, as the lower impact may cause to the higher relative impact of the transportation system as it disrupts the accessibility and pass-by movements of the transportation system. And this is considerably higher when it comes to the vehicular movements. As we can see, the relative impact is more than 90%, because in the larger distances, it caused to decrease a lot of shortest paths, a lot of pass-by movements. So it caused to disrupt the entire transportation system in a significant manner. Afterwards, we examine the flood impact on the travel trips. So in order to assess the flood impact to the travel trips, the study calculates the centrality decline of the each selected trip purpose and mode's average trip length. In terms of that, the study assesses the how traveler adjusts their travel behavior in response to the transport network disruption. The analysis employs the data from Conference Home Visit Survey 2013, and where we acquire the average trip length for the selected trip purposes and modes. The result shows that in the lower trip length, like 2 kilometer, 5 kilometer, the significance of the impact is considerably low. And when it comes to the higher distance, like 8 kilometer, 10 kilometer, the impact is significantly higher. This mainly shows you the impact to the attraction of origin destination trips of the transportation network. So in that sense, when considering the larger distance, the impact is considerably higher, because in the lower trip length, people can use alternative roads, but when it comes to the larger road network, its impact to the transportation system is considerably higher. So when it comes to the between a central nodes, the result is same. As we can see, lower trip length, the impact is considerably low. But when it comes to the higher distances, we can see the impact is considerably higher. This clearly depicts the impact to the pass-by trips of the larger trip distances. So it causes to disrupt the entire transportation flow in the larger trip length. So as a summary, you can clearly see how this impact is happening on. So you can see larger trip lengths like home-based work, like public transportation, their impact to the particular trip purpose and trip modes are very significant, because in the larger distance, it disrupts a lot of pass-by road segments, and their impact is considerably higher in the larger trip length. This clearly depicts the impact to the public transportation, because in the public transportation, they always use the fixed transportation network, and disruption of the particular transportation network is caused to the disruption of the entire transportation mode. After that, we examine the critical change of the accessibility. In order to calculate the accessibility change, it assesses the spatial transformation pattern of the closeness centrality of the transportation system before and after the inundation. The study selects 3 significant distance thresholds to calculate the road centrality, as it distinguishes the different accessibility level of the transportation network. So in the 1 kilometer distance thresholds, in the baseline situation, you can see clearly that the accessibility is predominantly concentrated to the core area, and then it's little by little trickle down into the peripheral area. But with the flooding situation, we can clearly see the temporal accessibility hotspots are emerging, because core area accessibility is transferred to the several outer areas, outer accessibility hotspots. This is being increased with the increase in threshold distance, because while the threshold is increasing, core area disruption getting increased. So in that sense, we can clearly see the temporal accessibility hotspots are emerging, and this is good insight for the urban planners and transportation planners, as they can improve these areas transportation accessibility and also the facilities in order to better management of the transportation system in the future flooding event scenarios. So after that, we come into the conclusion of the study. So our study reveals 3 key findings. The first one is topological change of the road network have a significant impact on vehicular movements rather than the pedestrian movements due to the failure of shortest path in the road network. And the second one is the study revealed redundant depreciation of the transportation accessibility as it shifted the accessibility from downtown to suburban areas and emerged temporary accessibility hotspot in certain local areas. And the third one is the study identified significant decline of transportation accessibility in the longer strip length as the loss of shortest path road segments are significantly impact to the pass-by movements of the transportation system. Also, the study highlights the critical road segments in the flood situation and enhancing their traffic volume and level of service may be effect to better transportation management in the flooding situation in the future scenarios. Moreover, a comprehensive understanding of critical transportation system during the natural hazards is vital to emergency responders, crisis managers, and infrastructure operators to enhance the resilience of cities. Further, the research could also be conducted to determine the effectiveness of centrality to measure the future scenarios, for instance, adding of new roads, bridges in the inundated area. So these are the utilized references in our study. So thank you.
Thanks, Kalpana. I think it's a really important research study again, because I'm aware that there are, some like top-end research groups are actually doing similar research in other countries as well. So everyone is actually thinking of the resilience of critical infrastructure at the moment. So it's really good to say that these things are happening in Sri Lanka as well. I think, yeah, we have a question which has come through the chat. And before that, I think it's good to see there's a comment from Professor Dilanthi Amritunga as well. In the chat, she said, interesting discussions, keep up all the good work. So thanks, Dilanthi, for that. And there's a question from Hiran Tilakaratne. The question is, have you calculated the transport impact with the inundated time? I guess COVID lockdown restrict this more than flood. So Kalpan, if you're in the session and if you can please speak and comment on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So at the moment, we what we did is that we remove the flooded road segments and then we measure how much accessibility is there, how many how the road network is functioning on. So in that case, yes, we are actually counted the flood road segment. So that's why I'm telling that all the direct flood impact is happening around 3 to 7 road segments, but in the relative impact is more than 40% in the pedestrian movements, and also the vehicular movements, it would be around 90%. So yeah, we actually measure the impacted road segments. So that's why you measure how these relative and the direct impact is happening on these areas.
Thanks, Kalpan. So there's another comment. A question from Niroshan. Colombo attracts thousands of commuters. As per your study, during the study's flood events, which segment of people affected the most?
That is one of the important things we are identifying in study. So most of the time in the Colombo, transportation trips are happening on the major corridors. Like we know 7 corridors in the transportation system in the Colombo area. So we could identify these areas have more between values because these are intervening in a lot of transportation movements. So in that case, these 7 corridors are quite vulnerable for these flooding events. And also we know that the road network we are situated close to the streams, like we know we identify the Atsanagalvoya, several water streams. So these areas are vulnerable for, and these road networks also vulnerable, which are close to these major streams and also the river basin scenario. So in the overall, as a summary, I can say that most of the time these 7 corridors are more vulnerable than the other areas because their transportation trips are happening more compared to the other road network. So in that sense, we can say that we have better better identification of these 7 corridors and how these road networks could be resilient in the future scenarios for these kind of flooding events.
Thanks. I think if you have follow-up questions, as I said earlier, you can contact Kalpana using the email address in the book of abstract. So that's another question. We are slightly running behind the schedule. So Kalpana, if you can be quick and shortly
Okay.
answer this question. So how can we minimize long-distance trip disturbances due to flood?
Yeah. So in that sense, we need to identify better solutions. That means what are the road networks that are not affected of this flooding situation. So in that sense, so in our study, we clearly identify what are the road segments which are not affected. So in that sense, we can utilize these road segments in the future scenarios to manage transportation flow of this area. So yeah, that's the answer for that question.
Okay, thanks, Kalpana. Yeah, thank you very much for all the questions as well. I think we need to move to the next presentation now because of the time.
No need
Chatura,
to,
yeah?
answer all the questions because finally, of course, all the questions will be answered and published in the website itself. So
Yeah, I think we still can kind of, yeah.
I'm going to, introduce my colleague because he's one of preparedness.
Okay,
Next
sure.
presenter. Assessment of the minimum time requirement to evacuate people from Goal. In fact, from a tsunami in a Goal city, Nuan Madhavanarachi. How are you, Nuan?
Thank you, Chatura.
I think we need to play the.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
We need to play the presentation, the recorded one.
Madhavanarachi, Assistant Director Preparedness, Disaster Management Center. My research topic is assessment of the minimum time requirement to evacuate people from a tsunami in Galle City. Professor Sandika, Dr. Raj Prasanna contributed to this research. As you all are aware, 26 December 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami impacted Sri Lanka severely. It claims 14,000 live losses in Sri Lanka and huge economic losses and vast environmental damage also. So Galle is also one of down south districts severely impacted by tsunami. It is reported 4,200 death toll and also 128,000 displaced people, and also nearly 13,000 houses were damaged. Considering vulnerability and risks of the Galle city, the objectives of this research are understand the peak population in the city, calculate the minimum time requirement to evacuate the entire population for a safe places, and also demonstrate the concept to ensure the safety of movable assets in an emergency. So as a methodology, in terms of the calculation of the peak hour population in the city, so we applied several strategies. So we get the help of the group of undergraduate students in the university. So we measured the several peak times population and we repeatedly applied it all 7 days of a week. And finally, we calculated the maximum populated hour in a week, in a day. And also we conducted the survey to understand the background informations, and purposive and descriptive sampling techniques were applied for the survey. And also we collected the secondary data, especially number of buses available in the city and permanent residence informations and different type of employees informations, etc. we collected as the secondary data. So after applying the several strategies, we calculated the peak hour population. It measured as 9,950. So in our study area is basically Galle City. It includes 4GN division mainly, Kaluvalla, Pettigalawatta, Chinakorattua and Velivatta. So group consists of the temporary migrating people and also workers in private sector, especially shops, workers, street sellers, etc. And government workers also got the major portions, and also transit passengers also were in the bus stands, and temporarily settled people also included to this number. On survey results, the majority of it represents 59, and the age group nearly 21 to 40 age people, nearly represent 60% of this group. And also the education level of this group is up to A level 59%, and they up to O level, so 28%, and higher education people also 30%, 13% represent higher education of the people. And the economic status also the 49% people by the police station call. This sketch proposes one-way traffic plan in addition to the existing emergency traffic plan developed by the police department. So you can see that near the bus stand, there are about 35 buses are available always, and also 60 buses are parking surrounding the international playground. So using these 95 buses, so we plan to evacuate entire population from Gold City to safer place through expressway. The map shows the proposed evacuation routes. It distance about nearly 8 kilometers. This figure illustrates the vehicle moving in expressway. So you can see that both two ways we can use as a one-way 4-lane. So either side of roads we reserve for the parking. It helps to smoothly moving of the vehicles. So time calculations. So we assume that 20 seconds is needed for loading a bus, and also consider the passenger car equivalence and the conditions of the roads and the length of the buses. So we calculated the average speed. It is 20 kilometers per hour, and with that is highway entrance within 25 minutes. And also when the last bus reach to the highway entrance, it takes another 36 minutes altogether. To evacuate entire buses from bus stands to highway entrance, it takes 61 minutes. So minimum time requirement is the time we need for the different tasks. So T1 is the activation early warning system, and T2 is the time for reach the people to the temporary gathering places. We have identified 2 places to gather the people. And also T3 is the time for loading people to the buses. And finally T4 is the time for reaching to the buses to the highway expressway. So we assume these 3 time sequences take 20 minutes. So therefore 80 minutes needed to evacuate entire population to a safer place. So this calculation is done with some assumptions. So one is a DMC and the meteorology department is capable to give the warning within 20 minutes after occurring the earthquake. And next one is early warning dissemination mechanism activated properly as planned with all mode of communications, and also evacuation message would reach to the vulnerable people at the same time. So next one is all vulnerable community are aware on gathering 2 places. We propose 2 places, bus stands and the surrounding international playground. And also there should be an alternative announcement for the people who were not aware on the gathering places. And another one is very important one is, so there are different mechanism in place to evacuate the school students. So we suppose that mechanism don't disturb for the proposed system. Next assumption is pre-arrangement of the expressway control tool are in place. And also, existing light vehicle traffic plan is also not disturbed to the proposed plan. And the all other agreement with bus owners to use the buses at the emergencies are in place. Those are the assumptions. We discussed the findings. So we found peak hour as 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Friday. And also we proposed new 7 evacuation centers and 7 priority routes also to evacuate the permanent residents in the city. And also with using 90 buses, so 8,850 people can be evacuated to the safer places, and rest of people can be evacuated using the private vehicles also. For the parking purposes, we can use the from Pinnadu exchange to Baddegama inter-exchange, so 15 kilometers so for the parking. As a recommendation, it should be changed the safer center currently identified as a safer location. Through this research, we propose new 7 safe centers and safe routes. And also identification of additional places for temporary migrating people. That is also very important. And conducting training and awareness program for drivers and conductors also very important because they play a vital role at the emergency situation. So mechanism for deploying the police should be simulated and well practiced in advance to get the maximum results at the emergency situation. And train volunteer team also very important to support the police and other troops at the emergency situation. And also very important to have an agreement with the transport authority and the bus owners in advance to utilize those buses at the emergency situation. And also frequent simulation exercise also very important to understand the problems of the introduced system. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer those.
Thanks for the presenter for that. Another interesting and informative presentation. I think we have about 1 minute or so to answer questions. So there are 2 which have come through the chat box. The first one is, do Galle City tried out any mock drills for tsunami evacuation using the latest evacuation routes? If you can answer to that question quickly, maybe.
Yeah, Kanchana. Actually,
Yeah.
this is the practically it is very difficult to evacuate whole entire city. So therefore, this kind of simulation plan actually. So we didn't try out. But anyhow, with this proposed route is actually possible to evacuate through these routes actually, but didn't try out. But that with the figures, so we just assume that within that these conditions, so we can evacuate all entire population very easily, because you know that in the emergency situation, so how traffic is going on in surrounding city. So therefore, definitely we should simulate this practice, but right now we didn't practice it.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. There's a quick, I think the second question quickly we can answer.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chaturabha, you saying something? Sorry.
Yeah, just quick question from Nuan. Did you calculate the dynamic groups because since in a peak time the number of people in the Gold City or rather the bus stand area? Did you calculate that?
Yeah, actually, that my research area was nearly the main city. Main city consists of the 4D GN division actually. So then Jinakora to Kaluwella and Pettigalawatta and Veliwatta. Those 4 DN division are consist of the town city area. So just we calculated I explained the mechanism. So using that mechanism, we calculated the peak hour population. All are actually volatile population, but nearly 10,000 population we can calculate.
Okay. Kanchana, over to you, Kanchana.
Yeah, I think there's another question we can percentage you are using the expressway evacuation.
Yeah, actually, we propose to expressway because it is very convenient way to utilize this expressway to evacuate all buses without any traffic jam, and also there are plenty of spaces to either side of the road to park in the all the vehicles, even not only buses, but we give the priority on only for the buses, but otherwise there are separate traffic plan developed by the police department. But
Okay,
in
I
addition
think,
to that,
yeah,
of course,
thanks, Nuwan. I think, Hiran, I think you can follow up if you want
yeah.
with Nuwan on that one. Chatur, would you like to introduce our last presenter for
Of
the
course,
session?
thank you very much. Because the last but not the least, the presenter is from Disaster Management Center, Mechanism for Command and Control in Effective Incident Response Operations, Hiran Tilakaratna from Emergency Operations Center, Disaster Management Center. Yeah, now we can have the video play.
Let me discuss this small topic today evening with you. The mechanism for command and control in effective incident response operations. I am Hiran Tilakaratna as director on emergency operations, of course. Effective disaster response become one of the biggest challenges to all the governments worldwide, and it is required whether the centralized government systems is the ideal for effective disaster response. A command and control structure includes communication, both vertical and lateral, and information management, resource management, and first responder search and rescue techniques and technicians should be coordinated properly. A gap identified through our study due to non-availability of legalized response framework, the scope and the multi-sector authority were not regulated properly. For example, when a massive disaster occurred, responders are dispatched to the affected areas and later organized as a joint task force. For example, the recent landslides and also the garbage collapse structure was one of the good examples recently. It further aims to provide the suggestions to improve existing command and control structure, comparing with some of the national best practices also studied. Basically, the sphere of the emergency response is, as you can see here, 3 stages, pre-incidents, during the incidents and early recovery stage of the emergency response. For example, pre-incidents of the response, we are issuing the early warning. And this emergency management activities, once the disaster occurred, search and rescue and relief, impact assessment, immediate impact assessment, and later post-disaster recoveries, basically impact as a detailed impact assessment, and also the recovery and rehabilitation also discussed at this stage. So basically, the sphere of the response phase is emergency management and post-disaster. When you are going for the problem of this inefficient search and rescue operations, is basically we resulted more deaths and high casualties during the disasters, and also inactive response activities. We identified the direct causes of the inefficient search and rescue operations are inefficient command and control search and rescue teams, not having proper trainings, equipment, and also the warning systems, etc., etc. Challenges: division of stakeholders, priorities in national level, and we observed the Sri Lanka not considered the incident as specific issues. Search and rescue teams not reach to international level, that is INSRAC, International Search and Rescue Groups of the United Nations, and regional and international stands should be achieved. This search and rescue teams objective derived from no deaths and less casualties during disaster and active response activities were the main. And then of course we we comprehend this subject in several manners. Then the methodology developed accordingly. A detailed literature survey was done to evaluate the command and control mechanisms in various initiatives taken to improve the disaster response mechanism in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. And success stories and best practices were discussed to explore the research and operational knowledge gaps. 7 semi-structured interviews were done with ICS trainers and state government stakeholders of the government agencies to map the gaps and suggest suitable response mechanism. Interviews were transcribed and thematic analysis were conducted, allowing key themes to be identified. Initiatives taken to establish response management mechanisms such as ICS incident command systems and related specific response systems were evaluated by key informant discussions. Also, we surveyed several search and rescue schools. Basically, there's the Madurai Special Forces Training School and Special Task Force Katukurunda, Fire Training Schools, Vellavatta, Sri Lanka Army Response Training Schools, Gampala, and also the Navy, Sri Lankan Navy Rapid Squadron Training School at Putlam. So basically, information from that time, the study was selection accordingly. And selection criteria of the study was actually the relevancy of basic requirement, work-related controllable and urgency of the team, and achievable and feasibility of the teams, and also the economical and budget also. Chain of command and control hierarchy in Sri Lanka, this is actually a pretty good develop from after 2004 tsunami. And here we have several steps to several levels, national to grassroots level, and officials are also identified and designated at the ground level also. Especially, we'll discuss later, this ground level is a little deviation is there. And what they do and with whom also tabulated like this. Basically, the national levels interact with both district units and media at national level, and also dissemination of early warning messages to the communities. And then this Office of Coordination Defense Services is basically ensure the deployment of strike force and police. And district secretaries and divisional secretaries of the particular districts are respective with district design coordination unit and level politicians, divisional secretaries at division level and ground level, at the village level. They interact with the village. Design matrix is also established with several outputs. 4 outputs we identified: establish main centralized command and control coordination systems, and prepare training modules, conduct awareness and legalize to this special system in the country. And results and discussions were here. I mentioned, several 2 slides. Both basically the disaster response timeline after tsunami is developed pretty much, and emergency response coordination and disaster response coordination also developed. And emergency response coordination is not considered much, but we put a separate effort to establish C4SCR committee. Let's explain later. And search and rescue groups also, they are best practices and their applicability in Sri Lanka also. So you can see here the risk with the time in emergency response phase. Time is here and risk is here. Once the disaster is occurred, we have started reactive and curative phases during and after. The pre-disaster, before disasters, we have the preventive measures and management principles. The risk, we are managing risk actually. During the disaster, we have crisis management incidents and reactive loss. Also discuss and civil military relationship, risk transfer levels, and incident management international practice and establish a response mechanism. Especially, we suggested coordinate incident management, CIMM. As I mentioned earlier, the C4SR committee, of course, it's consisting this several three forces people: Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guards, Police, Civil Defense, Fire Brigade, and emergency ambulance. So the C4SR committee is directly dealing with the ground level people, operation commanders. Conclusion is, of course, evolution of disaster response in Sri Lanka from reactive response 2004 to it's developed proactive at the moment. Best practices and command control structures explained and communication hierarchy was identified through C4SR committee. The prospective model, by looking at the evolution of the command and control structure, also various communication. So it's like this, and military leading the emergency response structure. For the effective response and including efficient SAR missions is command, control, and communication. Especially, as I mentioned, the C4SR committee is basically we thought that it should be incorporated in the system. Starting from victim, it's very important. Victim or survivors as a first responders. They are just not as victim, but right? They are the survivors are the first responders. So we concept on this study as well. Basically, based on the legislative level, policy level, and planning level, and operational level, is very much needed to provide their support and proper recognition to the standard operation procedures and protocol of this particular response tool. And policy decisions need to be taken, establishing appropriate response management mechanism. As I mentioned, this SIM, coordinated incident management system, it's like this. So we are in by several teams and activities, and also several practices for this SIM models, and also the continuous coordination arrangements are needed up to tail response. So both civilian and military authorities help to smooth transfer and dissemination of same resources to complete this resource cycle. The civil military cooperation is further strengthened through this proposed SIM. Finally, the broader application is way forward is basically the regional level. SARC wing for disaster response is maybe a pretty good hope for us, and also the SARC SCR line should be standardized properly, and applying Sendai framework disaster risk reduction consideration of the UNESCO guidelines, principal strategies, and regional activities should be there. I think the BIMSTEC and SARC regional agencies should be get to it, because Sri Lanka, India is basically applying this incident response systems right now. An intergovernmental expert committee and joint assessment exercise is also these are for you.
Thanks for that presentation, Mr. Tilakratne. So I think we've come to the end of the time of this session, unfortunately. So we won't be actually, Hiran Tilakratne won't be able to respond to the individual questions, I guess. But if we can use the chat box to maybe respond to the questions think this link will be, the same Zoom link will be used for the next session as well. So we need to leave this session to make sure to allow the other participants to join the next session. So I think thank you very much for the presenters for all these good and informative presentations. And thank you very much, Pasindu and Chamat, especially for assisting us to run this session technically. Really good support there. Thank you. And Chature, do you have any final remarks?
We left out of time for the presenters and also to you, because it's nice to be co-chair with you, and we'll meet.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So if we can all leave the session now, it will allow the next session.